Welcome to This Explainer. We often think of the menstrual cycle as just this simple calendar event, right? A strict schedule to track on an app, but honestly, the reality of what's happening inside you on a microscopic level is way more cinematic than that. As it says right here, your body does not look at a calendar and decide that today is ovulation day. Instead, an extraordinary conversation between the brain, hormones, and ovaries gradually creates the signal that triggers ovulation. It's not a set schedule. It is literally a continuous, deeply complex dialogue. It's a masterpiece of biology, an endless loop of chemical messengers, microscopic races, and these huge dramatic transformations. So let's break down exactly how this whole thing happens.
Chapter 1. The Brain-Ovary Conversation. To really understand ovulation, we actually have to start far away from the ovaries. We need to zoom all the way up into the brain, specifically to a tiny region called the hypothalamus, because this is where the whole intricate process kicks off. Right here, a master chemical messenger is hard at work. It's called GnRH, or gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Now, the hypothalamus doesn't just flood your system with this stuff. No, it releases GnRH in a very careful pulsating rhythm. It literally pulses, and these pulses travel through a highly specialized local blood system called the portal circulation. This precise, steady rhythm, it's basically the pacemaker for human reproduction. So those little pulses of GnRH travel down to the anterior pituitary gland, which is just sitting right below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gets this signal and, right on cue, it releases two vital hormones of its own into your main bloodstream: follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, or LH. These two hormones act as dual signals, traveling all the way from the brain down to the ovaries. And honestly, it brilliantly illustrates the division of labor in the body. FSH does exactly what it sounds like. It stimulates the physical growth and development of the ovarian follicles, and each one of those houses a potential egg. Meanwhile, LH targets specific cells in the ovary known as theca cells, telling them to produce androgens. This whole setup is absolutely crucial because it sets the stage for everything that comes next.
Chapter 2. The Race to Dominance.
Okay, now we're going to shift our perspective from the brain down to the ovaries. This is where a cohort, a group of tiny recruited follicles, begins a fierce, almost brutal competition for resources. You might think, oh, a follicle just develops over the course of a single month, right? But take a look at this timeline. It's mind-blowing. The follicle that is about to ovulate actually started its developmental journey almost a year ago. For roughly 290 days, it was just growing slowly in a preantral phase, totally independent of the brain's hormones. Then it spent another 60 days developing a fluid cavity. It's only in the final 20 days that it enters this intense, hormone-dependent race to become the one chosen follicle.
And it really is a race for survival. As this group of follicles grows, they start producing estrogen, along with another hormone called inhibin. Now, these hormones actually send a negative feedback signal back up to the brain, which basically tells the brain to drop the FSH levels. So what happens? The dominant follicle, the one that happens to be super sensitive to FSH, survives this drop. It just keeps growing rapidly, pumping out massive amounts of a specific estrogen called estradiol. But the rest of the cohort, without enough FSH, they effectively starve and die off through a biological process called atresia. Only one makes it. So how exactly does this surviving champion, the dominant follicle, make so much estradiol? Well, it acts like an incredible microscopic factory, specifically a two-cell, two-gonadotropin factory. Here's how it works. The LH from the brain tells the follicle's theca cells to produce an androgen called androstenedione. Then that androgen is handed right over to the neighboring granulosa cells. Those granulosa cells, energized by FSH, convert it straight into estradiol. It's amazing. The dominant follicle essentially builds itself into this massive self-sustaining hormone engine. Chapter 3. The Hormonal Tipping Point. This brings us to a really crucial twist in our story. All this estradiol pouring out of the dominant follicle is about to fundamentally change how the brain reacts to the ovary. See, this whole time, the brain has just been waiting. But how does it actually know? How does it register the exact moment that this dominant follicle is completely mature and ready to drop an egg? Well, it all comes down to reaching a very specific chemical threshold. It turns out there is a magical tipping point. Once the dominant follicle pumps out enough estradiol to exceed 200 picograms per milliliter, and this is key, it sustains that really high level for about 50 hours, the brain's reaction dramatically flips. Instead of suppressing the brain, this massive wave suddenly triggers positive feedback. Now, interestingly, emerging science has proposed a totally fascinating mechanism for how this happens. GnRH neurons actually don't have estrogen receptors, meaning they can't even see the estradiol directly. But scientists now believe a specialized network of neurons called kisspeptin acts as the missing link. The kisspeptin network detects the high estradiol and basically shouts to the GnRH neurons, "Hey, it's time to go." The climax of this chemical tipping point is absolutely spectacular. This positive feedback forces the pituitary gland to just unleash a massive surge of luteinizing hormone, or LH. This dramatic pre-ovulatory LH surge acts as the ultimate green light for the body. Chapter 4: The Ovulation Climax. Let's zoom back into the ovary and look at the microscopic physical changes happening right before rupture. That LH surge we just talked about hits the dominant follicle and changes literally everything. Within 34 to 36 hours of the surge starting, the egg inside, the oocyte, wakes up from a really long resting state. It resumes its vital genetic division, a process known as meiosis, officially getting itself ready for potential fertilization. Meanwhile, the wall of the follicle is getting ready to break. But it's not random. It's a violent, highly coordinated cellular breakdown. The LH surge triggers the release of prostaglandins and proteolytic enzymes, like collagenase. Think of these like little chemical scissors. They start digesting the tough collagen wall of the follicle, thinning it down at one very specific spot on the surface of the ovary. This creates a weakened, bulging area called the stigma. Finally, the structural integrity just gives way. And it's not just some gentle leak. It is an explosive release. The follicle bursts wide open at the stigma, launching the mature egg, which is safely surrounded by a protective cloud of cells called the cumulus complex, right out of the ovary and into the peritoneal cavity. And right there, the fallopian tube is waiting to catch it. Chapter 5: The Luteal Transformation. So the egg is off on its journey, but the story inside the ovary is definitely not over. We are now in the aftermath of ovulation. The walls of that collapsed, ruptured follicle immediately reorganize themselves. They morph into a brand new, temporary endocrine gland called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum's main job? To pump out high levels of a brand new hormone, progesterone. Progesterone acts almost like a biological incubator. It completely alters the body's environment, preparing the lining of the uterus just in case there's a pregnancy. From here, biology can take one of two distinct paths. If the egg is fertilized, early pregnancy hormones will step in to sustain the corpus luteum, keeping that progesterone nice and high. But if no fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum just runs out of time. It has a built-in lifespan. It eventually regresses and dies off. And when it does, your progesterone levels plummet, the uterine lining loses its structural support, and menses begins, effectively resetting the whole cycle back to day one. Chapter 6: Timing and Tracking Ovulation. Okay, let's pull back to the macro level for a second. What does all this internal microscopic biology actually mean for women tracking their cycles in the real world? Well, the most crucial takeaway here is that ovulation almost never happens on a neat, set calendar day. This is exactly why the old rhythm method is so deeply flawed. See, the first half of the cycle, the follicular phase, where that wild race to dominance is happening, is highly variable from woman to woman and even from cycle to cycle. It might take a week or it might take 3. However, the luteal phase, which is the lifespan of the corpus luteum after ovulation, is relatively fixed at around 14 days. And, this is exactly why at-home ovulation tests are designed the way they are. They leverage this exact science. Instead of just blindly counting calendar days, these urine tests are designed to detect that critical LH surge. When you finally see a positive test, it means the brain has flipped to positive feedback, the green light has been given, and you've got a predictive window that the egg is going to drop in the next 10 to 36 hours. So we're going to leave you with this final, absolutely crucial thought. Ovulation is the result of a carefully coordinated hormonal sequence, not a decision made on a specific calendar day. It's a year-long journey of cellular growth that culminates in a 50-hour chemical tipping point, ending with an explosive release. Knowing what we know now about the kisspeptin networks and these tiny 2-cell factories, it really makes you wonder, right? What other incredible microscopic conversations is your body having right now, completely without your conscious knowledge? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep asking questions.